Greetings. Once again, we're going to be going over another contract that is pretty important as far as residential real estate is concerned. Today we're going to be discussing the as-is residential contract for sale and purchase and how Nizz Realty Inc. suggests you fill out this contract to the best of your ability and how the company highly recommends you complete it. So without further ado, let's begin. So the first part of the contract I've already filled out. You're going to have the seller's name, and you just put, if it's one person, just their name. You could also put an & and put the other names that are there respectively. Today, Nizz Realty Inc. is going to be the buyer in this particular deal, so we're going to put that there. So for the next part, it's pretty simple. You just put the street, address, city, and zip. You want to fill this out completely and don't leave anything out. So let's just say for this property, we're going to call it Happy Street. Well, let's say this one is in Plantation, Florida. With a zip code there. And you want to make sure this is filled out. I've seen many realtors, they leave out the city name, they forget the zip code, they forget to put the state. All of that's completely unacceptable. You must put the full property address here. It needs to be perfect here. There's no reason to leave out the city. Same thing with down here. I've seen other realtors, they put here United States County or something like that. You need to put the actual county it's in. So I highly recommend you put the county it's located. Plantation is a city in the county of Broward, so we're going to put Broward County there. Don't fill this out incorrectly. It's completely unacceptable, and it's a very simple thing. Put the proper county there. Same thing for the property tax ID, or as it's sometimes called the folio number. You could put whatever it is. You usually get that from the public records. I won't go to the public records and pull up somebody's property and name to show you this. So if you have further questions about how to get this information, just feel free to let me know, and I'll reach out to you the best I can and explain how to get that from the public records of the particular county you're looking to search. Same thing with the legal description. You'll get that from the public records. Sometimes it's just something very simple and short. Sometimes it's just the the street name with a couple of extra documentation to show where it is located as far as the legal description is concerned. Other time it's this huge few paragraphs of describing the property, and in that particular case you want to put something like for that argument's sake, you'd make an exhibit, then use a separate document and sign it and accompany it with this contract. So maybe you'd write like Exhibit A, and you create an Exhibit A document, write the whole legal description in there for this particular contract, and accompany that document with this contract. But for this particular property, we're just going to say that it's the same as the property address. Next paragraph is personal property. This is where you would write things such as the refrigerator, the oven, the range, the washer, the dryer, things like that is what you want to include here. Anything that's personal property. If it's starting to get more complicated, maybe you're including some furniture, TVs, paintings, something of that nature, which is very rare, but it does happen in sales. Sometimes furniture is included. If it's getting too big, you probably want to make an Exhibit B or Exhibit C, whatever you're going to be making there, and include a list of everything you're including, such as personal property. And if you're excluding anything from the sale, you would write it here. Maybe there's an extra refrigerator in the garage that it's not being included in the sale, so you would write that down here, that this is going to be left for the buyer. The seller is going to be taking this with them. So that's how you would fill out these sections. Pretty important to put this in here and explain what exactly is being included in the sale. Refrigerator, oven, microwave, maybe 2 refrigerators. You want to list all those things in this contract so that there's no discrepancies when it comes time to close. The next paragraph is we get into the purchase price. Let's say for this property, we're going to say it's $500,000. So we'd write that there. The next thing down here, and it's important, is to write the initial deposit being held in escrow. We do have an escrow account with our brokerage. Sometimes it's held by the title company or the attorney that's going to be doing the actual closing, and that's completely fine there. So you would write down, let's say for this property we're putting $25,000 in escrow. With our Realtor software, it updates it automatically down here to what's due at closing. So it deducts that 25,000 that's being held in escrow that is already being used. So this is the amount that's required to provide at closing. The next part you want to fill out here is usually box number 2 here is checked. You could write this box here. I usually never see that. It does happen from time to time that it accompanies the offer when everything's executed. Usually it's, this box here. It's going to be made within X amount of days. 3 to 5 days is a good amount of time. Usually it's made within 3 days. If you execute a contract on Monday, it's usually good to make that deposit by Wednesday, Thursday, the latest. Any longer than that is it becomes questionable of how serious the actual buyer is. Usually you want that deposit made fairly quickly once everything's executed and getting serious. And then you just put the escrow name down here, put the name of the company, the address, their phone number, their email, their fax number if they have one, and you just fill it out accordingly. If there's going to be any additional deposits, you could put that down here. Say you're going to be bringing in another 5,000, you'd write that there, or the amount, how many days it's going to be, and then you write the amount here. It's definitely important to fill out this information if you're going to do it. As far as part B and below, it's optional if you're going to be doing anything, but definitely fill out the escrow agent information so we know the title company or who's holding the actual escrow deposit. And these other paragraphs here, contact me if you're going to be filling these out, but most of the time they're not. The only thing extra I've really ever seen filled out is the additional deposit, and most of the time that doesn't even really happen because all the deposits put down initially with the main deposit. There's no reason to request for additional, just have it all done in the initial deposit. So if you have further questions about these here, feel free to contact me and I'll be happy to answer your questions. But for now, let's move on to the contract. The time for acceptance of the offer. Let's say we're sending this contract out on the 1st of October and you want it to expire by the 5th. So you'd click the 5th here. And if this contract's not executed by the 5th, then a new contract needs to be written or this contract is completely void. All parties need to sign it by the 5th of October. So let's just leave it there for that and move on. The closing date for this part, I like to put, let's say you want a closing date, let's say you're expecting to close at the end of October, the 31st. So you put that there. I like to put an extra to either on or before this particular date. So if you do close early, it's written here in the contract that, everyone's pretty much agreed to and signed that we're willing to close early if it is possible to close early. Let's say the loan that you're doing is done earlier or the association approval is done early. You don't have to wait all the way to that particular closing date. So pick a date you're going to close, put it in there, and I like to write the additional words on or before the particular date to make that easier and so there's no discrepancies and it's in writing. It's important to have everything in writing so that you have it signed by everyone and you have documented proof. So that's it for the first page there. Let's move along now to the next pages. Assignability is the next part here. You can fill out this part too if this concerns the property. Most of the time it doesn't. If there is something, the property is subject to lease or occupancy after closing, then you fill this part out. Most of the time this isn't really checked in a traditional sale, so if you have questions about this or have this particular situation, feel free to contact me. We'll discuss that. For now, let's talk about something that's usually typical with most sales is the assignability. For this part, most of the time you're going to click the last box that nobody's allowed to sign this contract. If you want to allow that for the buyer to be assigning this contract, this is usually for like wholesalers, somebody who's going to be locking the seller into a contract and then sending that contract over to the wholesalers or somebody else. I highly don't advise this. I prefer if, whoever's going to be doing the business and deal with me, just have them sign the contract. Why do I have to have this contract assigned to somebody else that I'm not dealing with and deal with a middle man or woman, whatever the case may be? So this is just my opinion, my professional opinion. If you want to allow the buyer to sign the contract, by all means, if that's how you're handling your sale, if it's what the seller wants and allows it, go right ahead. It's just my professional opinion. I'd say just have that person sign the contract and deal with it. don't have this, mark this last box and make it not assignable, just to keep things simple and not deal with the confusion and the headaches of that. So we'll move on to the next paragraph, is the financing part. If your buyer is paying all cash for the property, you click the first box here and you're done. That's it for this paragraph. Buyer's paying cash. There's no questions about, getting a mortgage or anything like that. They're just going to be paying cash at closing, and that's the end of that. You move on to the next paragraph. But if they're not paying cash, you'll click Part B here, where the contract becomes contingent upon getting approval for a mortgage. Where the mortgage is conventional, you mark it here. If it's VA or something different, FHA, you just click what it is. Let's say for this particular sale, it's a conventional mortgage. And you fill out everything as it goes. Maybe the mortgage is fixed. Is it an ARM mortgage, adjustable? Usually fill in these amounts as you need to. Most of the time, I just usually fill out the whatever type of loan it is, and I just mark if it's fixed or whatever the case may be, adjustable. Usually it's a fixed loan most of the time. I don't see too many other loans these days, but that doesn't mean that they don't happen. So it really just depends on what you have going on. Most of the time I don't fill out these other parts, and I just leave this part here blank, or you could put the amount of days here if you need some time to make a mortgage loan application. Most of the time, if you're executing the contract, you pretty much have done that already. All you have to do is call your your lender and so forth, and just get a couple of things going. But 5 days should be more than enough time. It really should be shorter than that, like 3 business days. But I guess you could leave this blank. It doesn't really matter too much. And you could fill in these parts about the interest rate and so forth, but it's not really too important. So for this, let's just move on. If you have any further questions about this, you could feel free to reach out to me and I'll answer it for you. But most of the time, you could just leave them blank. Just fill in these parts up here, just what type of loan it is, and if it's fixed or adjustable. As we move on down, this paragraph here is usually never filled out, very rarely. If you do have this particular case, once again, reach out to me and I'll discuss this with you, but it almost never happens out of most sales, so you usually just skip this paragraph here and get straight to the closing costs. So these are the closing costs to be paid by the seller and buyer. If there's anything other here, you write it in. Most of the time, I like to not leave this blank and write non-applicable, just N/A. Same thing with the buyer. If there's nothing else being paid for, just write non-applicable. Just to not leave it blank and not leave it open and so forth, and you have it completely filled out. That's just how I recommend that be done. Once again, it's not necessary, but highly suggested. As far as title evidence and insurance, most of the time I just leave this blank or fill in 15. I like to complete things and not leave it blank if I don't have to, especially for these type of situations and things. 15 days is good enough for title evidence or insurance. If you want to do it shorter, you can, or a little bit longer. It's completely up to you and the parties involved. 15 is good enough for me. It's how I usually leave it. And then the next part is this paragraph here. Most of the time I see most sales, they click the third one here. There's the seller shall designate closing agent, buyer shall designate closing agent, and then this paragraph here, which is the Miami-Dade Broward regional provision, where the seller shall furnish a copy of prior owner's policy and so forth. Most of the time this is clicked and you'll enter an amount here. Usually I just leave it at 200 because you see the next paragraph says $200, no more. So you can just leave that there. Me personally, when I do my personal sales, I like to do the other 2 paragraphs, but this is completely up to you as the realtor and the parties involved and what they want to do. I usually like to suggest doing the seller or buyer, whoever's going to pay what, depending on the negotiations. You usually choose it from there. A lot of times if I'm the buyer, I like to make the seller, designate and so forth and pay for these things. Other times, if I'm the seller, I'll let the buyer designate and maybe have them cover more of the closing costs. But really, this is completely optional on what you're looking to do. If you're in Miami-Dade and Broward County, most of the time this option is chosen. If not, then you can go ahead and choose one of these other 2 options up here, whatever you're looking to do and who wants to pay what, who wants to designate the closing agent. This is really completely optional in what you're looking to do. For this particular case, let's say the property's in Broward, and we're just going to leave it at this and fill this out with $200. As we move along, we have the home warranty. You could click buyer or seller. Most of the time I just click non-applicable for this and just move on because most of the time it's non-applicable and it's just not something you have to worry about. If it is something you're going to fill out and you have questions about it, feel free to reach out and I'll answer your questions, but most of the time it's just non-applicable and you move on from here. Special assessments. Most of the time you're going to want the seller to pay all assessments in full prior to closing. If that's not the case, and the buyer is going to be taking over the assessments, which usually doesn't happen. Most of the time there's some type of assessments like government liens or some type of assessment from the HOA. It's really what you're looking to negotiate in the sale. Maybe the HOA is redoing the roof or something of that nature. And the seller is going to be paying for those assessments up until the date of closing, which the buyer will take over that assessments and pay the rest. Sometimes, depending on the contract negotiations, that's what the parties involved want to do. If not, sometimes the buyer says, no, I want you to pay the assessments in full, cover the whole amount that you've been assessed, and due to the negotiations and the sales price, maybe the seller will agree to that and pay the full amount at closing. So it's really what your clients are looking to do, what the seller and buyer negotiate and agree upon. Most of the time I've seen the seller pay all the assessments in full prior to closing, but that's not always the case. Sometimes, like I said, it could be a new roof, the community is being updated, they're changing something, redoing the pool in the community, and there's an assessment, and the buyer is going to take over that. So reach out to me if you have further questions about this, but for now, we'll just leave this at part B, or yeah, mark this box at B, and just move on from there. The next paragraph is some disclosures, the flood zone. You could just leave this blank, or you could just fill this in with 20 as it says there, or you could lower, raise the amount of days. 20 sounds good enough for here. It's not really too much work to be done here in this paragraph. It's pretty self-explanatory with just disclosures and just putting an amount there for disclosures to be made and so forth. Then there's the lead-based paint disclosure. If you have a property that was built before 1978, you got to include that lead-based paint addendum, which we'll go over later on in this video. But if the property is, fairly newer and not built before then, you don't have to worry about that. HOA disclosures and so forth. This is just disclosures. The next part that we'd fill in is the property inspection, right to cancel. For this particular part, this is completely up to the buyer and what they're looking to do. Sometimes if it's a cash deal, the seller wants to close immediately, especially if there's no HOA, and they say we're only going to give you 3 or 5 days to do an inspection. It's up to the buyer if they want to accept that or not. Most of the time a good period is like it says here, 15 days, 2 weeks, which is 14 days, 10 days. Those are around like respectable time frames, but it's completely optional what you want to put here. For this particular contract, let's just say we're going to do a 15-day inspection period so that the buyer knows that they have 15 days to hire an inspector, do inspections themselves, take a look at anything, and make sure the property is up to their standards and there's nothing wrong with the property. And they have the right to cancel the contract if they find anything that's something that doesn't look good at all. Maybe they do an inspection, they find out there's termites in the property. That's a good reason to cancel a contract. If you execute a contract and 5 days in you get an inspection, find out there's termites, sometimes you see something like that, you don't even want to continue forward with the contract. Other times you may discuss with the seller to fix that or reimburse the funds for that, do something with the sales price, something. But this is the right to cancel due to inspection. 15 days is usually an acceptable amount, 10 to 15. For this particular deal, let's just leave it at 15 and move on. So a lot of these is just disclosures, talking about escrow agents and so forth. There's nothing really to fill out here. You can feel free to read through these paragraphs. It's talking about seller's default, dispute resolution, attorney's fees and costs, standard things it's talking about. Most of this is just reading through, nothing really to fill out. So we'll just skip all this and go down to where we need to fill out the next part, which I'm pretty sure is at the bottom. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Those are just pretty much paragraphs to read and just disclosures. The next part is the end of the contract here, pretty much. This part here, if there's any addendums, you would click these and attach them to the contract. Now for these addendums, I'll probably be making videos to go over each and every one of these because this video would be too long to go over all of these, but if there's a condominium involved in the sale, let's say it's a condo you're purchasing, you'd attach the condo rider and mark this here. That's a separate document that you would fill out discussing the condominium the condominium association. And then if there's a homeowners association, which is different from a condominium, let's say it's a single family home or a villa, and it's in a community that's governed by a homeowners association, you fill out the HOA addendum and complete it there. Seller financing, mortgage assumption. If there's FHA, VA financing, there's an addendum for that. You pretty much mark all of these that you need in what you're doing in this sale. If it's a short sale, the lead-based paint, as we discussed before, you include that in this particular sale if there is one. If there's a Housing for Oldest Person Act, sometimes there's a 55 plus community. You'd put that there just so that it's been disclosed that this is, a condominium community for those of the age 55 and older. At least the primary resident needs to be at least that age. You fill out all these here. And if you have something like, I think it's not on here, is the a pretty important document that's common these days is the seller's property disclosure. You'd click Other and put that there, that you're going to be including a seller's property disclosure, and you'd attach that document. That's another separate document we will go over in another video. So you just mark here what you're going to be attaching to the contract and include those addendums to this contract. And like I said, I'll be making additional videos to discuss those things at another time. For right now, we're just going to finish up this contract because we're about at the end of this. So I've already put this here. This is pretty important, and most realtors don't do this. I highly suggest that you do this because it's pretty important, because otherwise you don't really have anything in writing that anyone's obligated to pay you your commission. Some realtors may argue that it says it on the MLS, but the MLS does not guarantee the information that is put on there. It doesn't guarantee that they're paying you a commission, and you have no copy of the particular listing broker's listing contract, so you don't have anything as documented proof that you're due a commission. Most of the time, the companies are going to pay you your commission, but I have seen situations where they don't pay the commission, or they make it difficult, or they switch the commission amount. Maybe on the MLS it said 3%, and then come at closing they're saying they're only paying 1%. And you should definitely have this type of information written into the contract so that you don't run into that problem. So what I recommend you do is write in the additional terms. Write that the seller will pay 3% of this contract's purchase price as a real estate commission directly to Nizz Realty Inc, or whatever your company name is. For us, this is our company, so we're going to say this. So that now you know you're due your commission, and there's no discrepancies. It's right here in the contract. And if there's any other additional terms you're going to be adding in, you write it in here. But for this, I'm just going to leave this particular additional term. This is very important. I highly suggest you write this in here so that there's no discrepancies. You are due that 3% at the sale of this property. You can fill out these bubbles here if it pertains to the offer. Most of the time it doesn't, and you leave those blank. So we'll just move on to the end of the contract, which is just the signing. You can put the addresses of the seller and buyer, and definitely put your name here. I like to put the percentage I'm due here also. So let's just say the cooperating sales associate, we just put NIZDO as the name here for comedic, for just some comedy, just a name there, and we'll just have the listing brokerage name right here. Usually you put your name right here, and then you put the company name right here. Unless we're the listing brokerage, then you just put it over on this side. Then you write your percentage of what you do here. So this definitely has it written in the contract twice. You have it up here, which is the most important, and down here, which is also important, to have your name and the brokerage name. And then beside that, you have all the buyers and sellers sign it. Make sure they date it. Do not forget to have the contract dated. I've seen many times it doesn't get dated, which is unacceptable. And make sure they initial each page. Down here there are initials required, so make sure they sign, date, and initial each page. You need to make sure you go through all 12 of these pages and every other addendum page to make sure they're initial and sign. If you have a contract and you're missing the initials on page 9, let's say the buyer forgot to initial here, it's completely unacceptable. You need to make sure everyone initials every one of these pages to make sure that you know that they received the copy. So make sure you check every single page that they initial and they sign this document when it's actually time to execute a deal. That's it for this particular video. I hope this was helpful and useful in some way, And I'll be going over another video with different contracts and these addendums at another time. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time.